My name is Anya. For the last 18 months, I have served as the head of risk analysis and data ethics at Vidian Technologies. On paper, this made me one of the most critical guardians of the company's integrity. Vidian is one of the largest data management firms in the country, and our entire business model is built on a single, fragile word: trust. I was recruited based on a reputation for being thorough, unflinching, and possessing an unnerving ability to see patterns that others either missed or, as I would soon learn, actively chose to ignore. My job wasn't just to manage risk, it was to be the voice in the room that asked the hard questions. I was, in fact, the person they least wanted to do my job. I stood alone in the cavernous executive boardroom. The silence absolute. The projector still hummed, casting the irrefutable proof of their crimes onto an empty wall. 11 chairs were pushed back at sharp, discordant angles, their occupants gone. The walkout hadn't been a disagreement, it had been a performance. A perfectly choreographed act of dismissal designed to shatter my credibility. Julian, our chief operating officer, had delivered the final line himself. "We are not wasting any more time on these conspiracy theories." He hadn't just left. He'd left the heavy door wide open, a deliberate public invitation for the entire floor to witness my humiliation. For exactly 30 seconds, I stood frozen. The heat rose in my neck, a painful, prickling tide of pure adrenaline and profound, bottomless humiliation. Through the glass walls, I could see the entire floor had stopped working. My own team, the junior analysts I mentored, were staring, their faces a mixture of horror and pity. This was the point where they expected me to break. They expected me to cry, to pack my things, to resign in shame. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, everything inside me stilled. The fear evaporated. The shame dissolved. All that remained was a cold, sharp, and absolute clarity. This wasn't a disagreement. This was a cover-up. And they were terrified. I calmly disconnected my laptop. I gathered my notes, my motions measured and precise, my hands perfectly steady. As I walked out of the open boardroom, I could feel the dozens of eyes on my back. The walk from the boardroom to my office was the longest walk of my life. It was a walk of shame designed by Julian to be my final public disgrace. The whispers stopped as I approached, then reignited the moment I passed. I ignored them. I walked directly to my desk, sat down in my chair, and took one long, steadying breath. I opened my laptop. I did not open the presentation file. I did not open my resignation letter. I navigated to a draft email I had prepared 6 weeks prior, an email I had reviewed every morning since, hoping I would never have to send it. The recipient was a single name: Chairwoman Caldwell, the only independent member of the board of directors, a formidable woman who had personally overseen my recruitment. She was the one who, in my final interview, had looked me in the eye and said, "We are hiring you to find the things no one else wants to find. If you find them, you will meet resistance. Do not come to me with whispers. Come to me only with certainty." I now had that certainty. The email contained no attachment, no desperate report, no desperate plea. It contained only one sentence, a simple, elegant code we had established for this exact scenario. "Chairwoman Caldwell, as we agreed upon in my hiring terms, Situation 404 has been triggered. Please confirm." Situation 404 was our private, sterile term for the worst-case scenario, the discovery of systemic, high-level executive collusion that compromised the company's integrity and exposed it to existential risk. I hovered my mouse over the send button for a single, steadying second. This was the point of no return. Then, I clicked it. Through the glass walls of my office, I had a clear view across the open-plan floor into the office of Meredith, our head of human resources. She had been one of the 11, her face a mask of practiced disapproval as she'd followed Julian out. Less than 1 minute after I sent the message, I saw her office phone light up. She snatched it up, listening for a moment. She stood up from her desk so fast that her own chair rolled back and hit the wall. She grabbed the phone's handset, her back to the floor, one hand pressed to her temple as she paced in a tight, frantic circle. It was the posture of someone receiving terrible, life-altering news, not a simple system notification. It was the posture of guilt. The trigger had been pulled. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I knew 8 of them would be locked out of the building. But I didn't know that before 2 o'clock. They would try to strike first, and they would be far more brutal than I anticipated. The summons came at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was not a phone call. It was a cold, impersonal meeting invitation from Human Resources titled Confidential Check-In, in a small, windowless room on the HR floor, a room I knew was reserved for terminations and sensitive disciplinary actions. This was not a surprise. It was the next logical, desperate move in their playbook. When I entered the room, the atmosphere was thick and staged. Julian and Meredith were already seated, not on opposite sides of the table, but next to each other, presenting a unified front. On the table between us was a box of tissues. The prop was so insulting, so condescending, it almost made me laugh. "Anya, thank you for coming," Meredith began, her voice dripping with a false, saccharine empathy that made my skin crawl. "Julian and I wanted to talk about this morning. We're worried about you." I sat opposite them, my hands resting calmly on the table. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me tremble. "Worried about what, Meredith?" "Your presentation," Julian cut in, leaning forward, his voice now a low, concerned rumble. He was playing the part of the disappointed mentor. It was alarming, Anya. It showed a concerning level of instability, paranoia even. "We value your contributions, we truly do. But we've seen this before. Burnout. You've been digging so deep for so long, you've started connecting dots that aren't really there."
This was their move. It was brilliant in its own sociopathic way. It was not an attack on my data. They knew they couldn't win that fight. It was an attack on my credibility, my sanity. They were building a narrative, one they had likely been seeding for weeks. Anya, the high-stress analyst who finally cracked. Meredith slid a thick, bound folder across the table. "Anya, the company wants to support you. We believe in you, which is why we are prepared to offer you a fully paid 6-month leave of absence effective immediately. Time for you to rest, to recover, get your perspective back." I opened the folder. My eyes scanned the pages, but my mind was working faster. On top was a simple, generous letter outlining the offer. 6 months, full pay. But tucked beneath it, as I knew there would be, was a 40-page non-disclosure and non-compete agreement. I am an expert in risk. I read contracts for a living. This was not a severance. It was a cage. It was a professional execution. It was so restrictive, it would not only bar me from ever speaking about Vidian technologies again, it would bar me from working in data analysis for any competitor anywhere in the world for 5 years. They were not just trying to buy my silence, they were trying to erase me from the industry. As I scanned the first page of the agreement, pretending to absorb the legal text, my personal phone, sitting on the table, vibrated. A single, short buzz. I glanced down. A system email from our internal network, a notification I had set up myself. Reading the notification with a small, private surge of triumph, an attempt to recall your message titled Situation 404 has been made. They were panicking. They were clumsy. They were trying to simultaneously erase the digital trail to the board while they were in the very room trying to bribe me into silence. The irony was staggering. I looked up from the phone, my expression carefully neutral. Julian was watching me, a faint, predatory smile on his lips. He mistook my silence for a shock, for defeat. He thought he had me cornered. He thought I was broken. I closed the folder slowly, placing both my hands on top of it. "This is a very generous offer," I said, my voice perfectly level, perhaps a little weary, playing the part they had cast for me. "I need time to consider this. It's a lot to take in." I paused, then looked at Julian. "May I use my office to think it over?" Julian's smile widened. He had already won in his mind. The unstable woman was folding, just as he had planned. "Of course, Anya. Take all the time you need. Just have Meredith's assistant know by end of day." He didn't know I only needed 10 minutes. He didn't know that my consideration was a chess move. I did not need to think. I needed to retrieve my encrypted drive, the one containing the full, unredacted data packet I had prepared for Chairwoman Caldwell. The 404 email was the trigger, but she would need the evidence. I walked back to my office, my heels clicking softly in the quiet corridor. This time, I was not on a walk of shame. I was on a mission. The urgency was a cold fire in my chest. I had to get that drive. I had to get it, and I had to get out of the building. I rounded the corner to my department. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was wrong. My workstation was in sleep mode, but the small pulsing blue indicator light was off. The optical sensor on my mouse, usually a bright, piercing red, was dark. A cold dread, far sharper than the humiliation from the meeting, settled in my stomach. The hum of the machine was wrong. It wasn't the low, digital breathing of sleep mode. It was the high-pitched, frantic whine of a hard drive being overworked. I tapped the keyboard. The screen did not wake up to my desktop. It flashed, then resolved to a stark, ugly blue screen from the Information Technology Department. "System update in progress. Critical containment. Do not power down." They were wiping my drive right now. This wasn't a standard update. This was an execution. Julian hadn't waited for my answer. The moment I left that HR office, he had made the call. He and Elias, our director of information technology, were trying to destroy every piece of evidence, every log file, every chart, before Chairwoman Caldwell could even respond to my alert. I reached for my encrypted drive, which I kept magnetically attached under my desk. It was gone. They had been in my office. They had taken it. I was too late. I heard a frantic, hushed whisper from the doorway. "Anya?" I turned. It was Leo, a junior technician from the Information Technology Department. He was a good kid, quiet and brilliant, someone I had personally defended 3 months ago when he'd reported a major security flaw, and Elias had tried to fire him for overstepping and causing panic. He was pale, glistening with a thin sheen of sweat. "I can't stop the wipe order," he whispered, stepping just inside my office, his eyes darting around the empty department. It came from Director Elias himself, flagged as a critical security containment. It's bypassing all standard protocols. I've never seen anything like it. My blood ran cold. "Leo, that drive contained everything, the full investigation." "I know," he said, cutting me off, his voice trembling, a mix of terror and defiant pride. "I saw the access logs you were pulling last week. I knew what you were looking at." He took a quick, shaky breath. "As soon as I saw the wipe order target your machine, I checked the automated backups. Our system protocol runs a full snapshot every 15 minutes. The wipe order came in at 1:12 p.m. The last snapshot ran at 1:10 p.m. I rerouted that snapshot to a private off-network server before the wipe could erase the backups too." He was visibly shaking, terrified of what he had just done. "It's the only one, Anya. Everything else, it's all gone. The local drive, the network drive, even the rolling backups are being sanitized as we speak." I looked at this young man who had just risked his entire career, his entire future for me, for the truth. "Leo, there's no time," he urged. The full physical wipe will take another 5 minutes to complete, but your access is already flagged. You need to leave the building now. They're coming for you. I grabbed my coat and my bag. My mind was racing, recalibrating. They hadn't won. They had just confirmed their guilt in the most spectacular way possible. Thank you, Leo. You did the right thing. Now get out of here. Go back to your desk. You never saw me.
He nodded and vanished. I walked, not ran, to the elevator bank. My mind was a whirlwind. They didn't just disagree with my report. They weren't just covering their tracks. They were actively, illegally destroying evidence of a federal crime. As I pressed the button for the lobby, I heard his voice, Julian's angry, confident baritone echoing from down the hall. "Where is she? Find her!" The elevator dinged, the sound deafening in the charged silence. The doors slid open. I stepped inside, and as they began to close, I saw them. Julian, Meredith, and 2 building security guards striding purposefully down the hall, directly toward my office. They were too late. I didn't go home. I couldn't. I went to the small, anonymous coffee shop across the street from our building, taking a table by the window where I could watch the lobby. My hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally hitting my system in a wave that left me nauseated. I ordered a black coffee I didn't want and watched the glass tower of Vidian Technologies, my former workplace. It looked like a fortress, but I knew now that it was a house of cards. They had overplayed their hand. The attempt to gaslight me, followed by the immediate illegal destruction of my workstation, was more confirmation than Julian's walkout. It was a panicked, screaming confession. But the snapshot Leo had saved was useless if I couldn't get it to Caldwell. And now I had a new, terrifying problem. My predecessor, Arthur, the man whose sudden, early retirement 6 months ago had created the vacancy I filled, had been working on a similar investigation. His files were the first ones I found that had been corrupted, his research notes mysteriously incomplete. I had his personal number tucked away in my contacts. I had always been hesitant to call it, half suspecting he might have been part of the problem. I had never been more wrong. I dialed. He picked up on the second ring. "I was wondering when you'd call," a tired, gravelly voice said. It was Arthur. "Arthur, it's Anya. I'm out. I think I'm in trouble." "They wiped your drive, didn't they?" He didn't sound surprised. He sounded deeply, profoundly resigned. "They did the same thing to me, right after my final presentation." My stomach tightened. "What did you find, Arthur?" He let out a long, weary sigh, a sound that seemed to carry years of bitterness. "The same thing you did, I'm sure. The outbound data packets, the masked servers. I thought it was a bug, Anya, a massive, catastrophic security hole. I was trying to be the hero, to plug the leak before it sank the company. It's not a bug, Anya, it's a feature." The words hung in the air. The smell of burnt coffee in the shop suddenly seemed suffocating. What do you mean?" "It's a business model," he said, his voice raw with a fury he had clearly been nursing for months. "They aren't losing that data, they are selling it. A private off-book revenue stream going directly to a handful of executives. Julian, Elias, Meredith, all of them. They designed the system to sell abrogated client data to third-party brokers under the guise of partnership analytics. It's worth hundreds of millions. That's what you stumbled into, not a mistake, a conspiracy." I felt sick. This was infinitely larger, darker than I had imagined. They were setting me up to take the fall. Arthur continued, his voice rough. "When I got too close, they didn't try to gaslight me at first. They tried to include me. Julian called it a new revenue stream, untapped potential. When I refused, that's when the narrative about my instability started. That's when my own file started to corrupt. And when I persisted, they offered me the generous retirement package. They just offered me one," I whispered, staring at the Vidian logo on the building across the street. "Of course they did," Arthur scoffed. "It's their playbook. And I saw the other file, Anya, the one they were preparing, a secondary fabricated report created by Elias blaming me for the data leaks, painting me as a disgruntled employee selling company secrets to the very brokers they were in business with. It was their checkmate. If I didn't take the money and disappear, they would have me arrested." A cold wave of realization washed over me.
The meeting with Meredith, the paid leave, the non-disclosure agreement. They were going to do the same thing to me, I said, the pieces clicking into place with horrifying speed. Of course, Arthur said. You're just the sequel, Anya. I was the original. It's a repeatable playbook. 1, identify the threat. 2, try to buy them. 3, if they refuse, discredit them with the fabricated report. 4, erase all evidence. Look, Anya, Julian is arrogant. He's not just going to destroy that fabricated report on you after you're gone. He'll keep a hard copy. He kept one on me. It's his insurance policy, his leverage. If one of his co-conspirators, like Elias, ever tried to betray him, Julian has proof that they all participated in framing an innocent employee. It's mutually assured destruction, and he thinks he's the smartest man in the room. I hung up the phone. My blood was ice. I wasn't just fighting a cover-up, I was fighting a planned, repeatable criminal business model designed to create and dispose of scapegoats. I looked across the street at the glass tower. They thought I was gone. They thought I was broken, silenced, and erased. They didn't know I had just been given the map. I finished my coffee, my resolve hardening into something cold and unbreakable. I paid my bill, walked out of the coffee shop, and strode back into that lobby.
The same security guard who had watched me flee the elevator now stepped directly into my path as I approached the turnstiles. He looked uncomfortable, but his orders were clear. "Ma'am, I'm sorry," he said, placing a hand out. "Your access badge has been deactivated. I have to ask you to leave the premises." "That won't be necessary, officer," a sharp, clear voice said from behind me. I turned. Chairwoman Caldwell was striding across the marble lobby, her face set like stone. She was not alone. She was flanked by 2 men in severe, dark suits, carrying the unmistakable hard-sided briefcases of forensic auditors. They didn't look like accountants. They looked like undertakers. She did not slow down as she approached me, her heels clicking with the sound of a ticking clock. "Thank you for the signal, Miss Anya," she said, her voice loud enough for the security guard and the entire reception area to hear. It cut through the lobby's ambient noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "It seems we arrived just in time." As if summoned by magic, the elevator doors opened, and Julian and Meredith stepped out laughing about something. Their laughter died instantly when they saw us. It was as if they had walked into a wall of ice. Julian's face froze, his eyes darting from me to Caldwell and then to the grim-faced men beside her. He saw his victory, his perfect, tidy plan, evaporating in real time. He tried to smile, but it was a gruesome, tight-lipped grimace. "Chairwoman," Julian stammered, attempting to regain his composure, his voice suddenly oily and false. What a surprise! We were just handling a delicate internal human resources matter. Miss Anya is unwell. We've placed her on paid leave." Caldwell did not stop walking until she was directly in front of him. She was a foot shorter than him, but in that moment, she seemed to tower over him, a monolith of pure, cold authority. "No, Julian, we are handling it now." She turned to the stunned security guard. "Miss Anya's access is to be fully reinstated, immediately. She will be guiding this team wherever they require." She then turned back to me, her eyes cold and clear, but with a flicker of something I recognized. Absolute resolve. "Anya, please lead these gentlemen where they need to go." I looked past her, directly at Julian. His face had gone from red to a sickly pale white. His eyes met mine. He knew that I knew. But he didn't know that I knew about Arthur, and he certainly didn't know, not with any certainty, that I knew about the hard copy. "Of course, Chairwoman," I said, my voice clear and strong. "We'll start with Director Julian's office." The elevator ride to the executive floor was a symphony of suffocating silence. It was the same elevator I had ridden that morning, full of nervous energy and a belief in the data. Now I was riding it as a prisoner, or perhaps as an executioner. I stood in the back, flanked by the 2 silent and posing auditors. In front of me stood Chairwoman Caldwell, her posture radiating a cold, unassailable authority. And next to her, Julian and Meredith. Julian stared at the polished steel doors, his reflection a mask of forced calm, but I could see the rapid,
angry pulse in his neck, a betrayal of the rage he was suppressing. Meredith was a different story. She was visibly trembling, her expensive perfume so thick in the small space it was nauseating, a cloud of floral panic. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor numbers as they ascended, as if watching her entire career, her entire life, tick upwards to an inevitable end. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open with a quiet, expensive whoosh. When we stepped out onto the hushed, deeply carpeted hallway of the executive suite, the air felt different. It was the insulated quiet of unaccountable power, a place where bad news never arrived unless it was invited. Director Julian's executive assistant, a woman who had never once acknowledged my existence, looked up from her desk. Her eyes widened, first in confusion, and then in something like fear as she saw Julian and Meredith, followed by me, Caldwell, and two men who looked like federal agents. She didn't say a word. She simply watched us, her mouth slightly open. Julian's office was large, a corner suite, with floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the city. It was a room designed to communicate power, to make visitors feel small. He moved with a stiff, wooden gait, a reflexive attempt to reclaim his territory by sliding behind his massive, empty desk. He was a king retreating to his throne. But Chairwoman Caldwell spoke before he could even touch his chair, her voice cutting through the space. "Please stand by the window, Director Julian, where we can see you." He stiffened, his eyes flashing with a hot, dark anger. For a moment, I thought he would refuse. But he looked at Caldwell, then at the two auditors, and he knew that he had no move to make. He obeyed, walking stiffly to the window, crossing his arms, a man trapped in his own glass cage. The auditors, with cold, practiced efficiency, began their work. One began connecting their equipment to his workstation, while the other began a methodical, physical sweep of the room. "This is harassment, Chairwoman. You are disrupting a vital company operation on the word of a disgruntled employee." He gestured at me with his chin. "You won't find anything. My system is clean." "I'm sure it is," I said quietly. My voice was calm, and the sound of it seemed to startle him. He sneered, a pulling back of the lips that was truly ugly. You actually think you've won? You're a child, Anya. You've just thrown a grenade into your own career. When this is over, you won't be able to get a job as an intern."
I ignored his computer. I walked directly to the expansive, dark wood bookshelf that covered the far wall, the one Arthur had described to me over the phone. It was a monument to his ego, filled with leadership books and photographs of Julian shaking hands with important people. "What are you doing?" he snapped, his voice sharp with a new, sudden anxiety. "Those are my personal effects. You have no right." "On the contrary, Director," Caldwell said, not even looking at him. "Anything in this office is company property." I ran my fingers along the seam where the custom shelving met the wall. Then I saw it. The wall next to the shelf was covered in matching decorative wood paneling. I pressed my palm flat against the panel closest to the shelf and pushed. A faint, oiled click echoed in the silent room. Meredith let out a small, strangled gasp. Julian's face, which had been tight with anger, instantly turned the color of ash. He took an involuntary step away from the window. "That's just an access panel for the building's wiring," he said, his voice suddenly thin. One of the auditors looked up, his eyes wide with sudden, predatory interest. He stepped forward and pulled the panel open. It was not a space for wiring. It was a small, lead-lined compartment. Inside, nestled in the wall cavity, was a small, high-security personal shredder. And beneath it, sitting on a small metal shelf, were two thick, red file folders. "Well," Caldwell said, her voice laced with ice, "what have we here?" The auditor, who was now wearing white cotton gloves, carefully removed the folders. He placed them on Julian's desk. He read the labels aloud, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, making the words all the more damning. "Contingency. Subject, Anya. File classification, internal fraud."
He then lifted the second, older-looking folder. Contingency. Subject, Arthur. File classification, internal fraud. He opened the top folder, my folder, and scanned the first page, then looked up at Elias, the Director of Information Technology, who had been summoned and was standing by the door. Director Elias, this appears to be a fabricated report prepared for the board, detailing security breaches and unauthorized data transfers originating from Miss Anya's workstation. It includes falsified logs, also included here, that are countersigned by you. What? Elias choked out, stumbling forward. That's not possible. Julian, what is this? I never saw this. Julian said nothing. He just stared at the open panel, a man watching his own ghost walk out of the wall. Arthur had been right. It was an insurance policy. Julian had been so arrogant that he had kept the evidence of his old crimes right next to the evidence of the new one. We did not stay in his office. Chairwoman Caldwell instructed the auditors to secure the room and bag the evidence. We will reconvene in the main boardroom, she said. Director Elias, you will join us. Director Meredith, you will also join us. You will summon the other 10 executives who are present at the 9 a.m. strategy meeting. Tell them it is an emergency board matter. We were all assembled in the same cold room where I had been humiliated just hours earlier. But the power dynamic had irrevocably, seismically shifted. I sat at the table to the right of Chairwoman Caldwell. Julian, Meredith, and Elias sat opposite us, a panel of defendants. Elias was sweating profusely. He kept adjusting his tie, his eyes darting between Julian's terrifyingly calm face and Caldwell's stony one. Chairwoman, I must state for the record, I have no knowledge of those folders. My signature was forged. Julian, tell them. Julian turned his head slowly to look at Elias and smiled. It was a smile of pure reptilian contempt. Don't be a fool, Elias. Be quiet, he said softly. Director Elias, can you explain, then, why you issued a critical containment order to wipe Miss Anya's workstation at 1:13 p.m. today? An order flagged as a high-priority security breach that you, yourself, seem to have no knowledge of. I was acting on information from the Chief Operating Officer, he blurted out, pointing to Julian. Julian said her machine was compromised. I was following protocol. A protocol that bypasses all automated backups and requires no second authorization? I asked, my voice now sharp, prosecutorial. A protocol that also, coincidentally, erases all of a risk analyst's primary evidence just moments after she's been offered a 6-month leave of absence. I was protecting the company, he insisted, his voice rising in panic. That isn't true. The voice came from the doorway. It was quiet, but it landed in the room like a physical weight. Everyone turned. It was Leo, the junior technician, his face pale but resolute. He held a small silver USB drive in his hand. Leo? Elias said, his name a sharp, horrified whisper. What are you doing? Get out of here. You're fired. Leo, please come in, Chairwoman Caldwell said, her voice calm. Leo walked to the table and placed the USB drive in front of Caldwell. Director Elias ordered me to sanitize Arthur's records 6 months ago, and he personally ordered me to execute the Level 5 wipe on Anya's drive this morning. He told me to bury the order under a false maintenance flag. He's lying, Elias shouted, half rising from his chair. It's his word against mine. No, it's not, Leo said, his voice gaining strength. Our internal maintenance calls are recorded. This, he tapped the drive, is the audio recording of your call to my extension. And this, he tapped it again with finality, is the 1:10 p.m. full system snapshot of Anya's entire drive, which I rerouted to a private server 2 minutes before you tried to destroy it. The room fell into a silence so profound, I could hear my own heartbeat. Elias slumped back into his chair, a broken man. Julian closed his eyes. He had been betrayed by his own arrogance. He had been caught by the courage of a junior technician he probably didn't even know the last name of. He knew, in that moment, that he was done.
The other 10 executives arrived in a flurry of annoyed whispers. They still had no idea what was happening. They still thought they were on the winning side. When the room was full, Chairwoman Caldwell stood. She did not open with the folders. She opened with the consequences. "Good afternoon," she said. "As of 30 minutes ago, our largest client, North Star Mutual, has sent notice. They are temporarily halting their $500 million contract pending the outcome of rumored data integrity investigations that have hit the financial news." The room exploded. A ripple of pure, unadulterated panic went around the table. "500 million?" One executive from finance whispered, his face ashen. The director of sales, a man named Harris, who had been the first to stand that morning, stood up again, his face beet red. He pointed a shaking finger at me. "This is her fault," he shouted. "Her baseless paranoid report must have leaked. Jillian was just trying to contain the damage. She's destroyed us." "Containment, Director Harris?" Caldwell asked. She nodded to the auditor, who projected the scanned covers of the 2 red folders onto the main screen. "Contingency, Anya. Contingency, Arthur." The room fell silent again. Harris slowly sat back down. "What you see," Caldwell continued, "is not containment. It is a repeating criminal conspiracy. Director Julian has not only been selling our client data, he has been systematically framing and removing any employee who discovered it. Arthur was the first. Miss Anya was intended to be the next." She let the reality of the words settle. The 10 executives were no longer looking at me with contempt. They were looking at Julian with a dawning, sickening terror. They had walked out of my meeting not to support a leader, but to enable a criminal. "The evidence for this is absolute," Caldwell said. "It includes audio recordings, server snapshots, and these fabricated reports. The relevant authorities are currently waiting downstairs in the lobby." A collective gasp. Chairwoman Caldwell turned her gaze to me. "Miss Anya, you are the head of risk analysis. You brought this to light. What do you recommend to the board?" This was it. The entire room was holding its breath. I stood up slowly. I looked at the 10 executives, one by one. I looked at Meredith, who was openly weeping. And finally, I looked at Julian, who met my gaze with a flat, dead emptiness. "My recommendation is simple," I said, my voice clear and steady. "First, we hand Director Julian and Director Elias over to the authorities waiting in the lobby. Their conspiracy is a criminal matter." I paused. "Second, regarding the other 10 executives who participated in the walkout this morning, an act designed to intimidate, discredit, and silence a whistleblower," I let the silence stretch. "I accept their resignations effective immediately." No one argued. They knew they had no choice. They had tied their fates to Julian's, and the rope had just run out. I did not stay. I left the boardroom and went to Julian's office, standing by the window, looking down at the lobby. One by one, I saw them. First, the 10 executives, walking out in a single, shamed huddle. They weren't arrogant this time. They were being escorted out by security, each of them carrying a small, sad-looking cardboard box. Then I saw Julian and Elias. They were not carrying boxes. They were in handcuffs, flanked by 2 uniformed police officers who guided them through the revolving doors and into the back of a waiting police car. The walkout was complete. I stood there for a long time, watching the traffic move, breathing in the quiet. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an internal call from Chairwoman Caldwell.
Anya, she said. Her voice was tired but firm. I'm in Julian's old office. It feels a bit empty. I smiled, just slightly. It's a large space to fill. Indeed, she said. The board just held an emergency vote. We are dissolving the head of risk analysis position, effective immediately. My breath caught. For a split second, after everything, I thought... Instead, she continued, we're creating a new one for you, one with a bit more authority. This company is broken, Anya. It needs to be rebuilt from the ground up by someone who actually read the blueprints. What position is that? I asked, though my heart was already pounding. Chief Operating Officer, Caldwell replied. You can start immediately. And Anya, yes, keep the lights on.